Ladies, gentlemen, children of all ages, welcome to our Fuds on Film podcast. I am Scott Morris. I'm joined today by Craig Eastman.
Fare thee well.
And, of course, Drew Tavendale.
Hello.
So today we're going to spend a bit of time bothering your ear holes with the curious phenomenon of old men starring in action films. The kind of people that should really be drawing a bus pass that are now wielding gats and getting all up in people's area. Seems to be a rather curious phenomenon that's occurred lately. There's a few guys that are emblematic of this. We're probably talking about guys like Liam Neeson, of course Arnold Schwarzenegger returning to the fold, but I think perhaps the most obvious example, something one that really brought it to my attention, is good old Sylvester Stallone. So
yes, good.
I guess
old Sylvester
Stallone. I guess what really propped this up was back in, I think it was 2008, with the somewhat surprising return of Rambo to the big screen, which really has then started a snowball rolling which no one seems able to stop, and I'm not sure it's really a great thing.
Well, in a way, as a car crash show, it kind of is a great thing. And a lot of these films that we'll talk about probably work far better than they have any right to do. But yeah, it seemed an unlikely proposition at the time, right? When Rambo first came out, a lot of people thought he was insane, but he kind of pulled it off.
Yeah, it's just unusual that it's around about the time we were talking about who's going to hand over the batons to the next generation of action stars, and it really turns out that most of these guys have just kept the baton themselves.
Yes, they clearly decided that the next generation, and even the generation after that, at this point, are clearly a bunch of pussies and aren't up to the task. As I saw Rambo itself described in an IMDb message board thread once. Some of these young guys are just a bunch of Nambla crap.
I suppose, seeing as we mentioned it, we should maybe give Rambo a bit of a dissection, because I watched
Nambla,
this again.
no.
I watched this again last night, and I remember watching it at the time and thinking, well, this is actually kind of works in terms of an action film. It's doing most of the things right. I watched it again last night, and it is really quite brutal and let's say charitably simplistic. I mean, it's got some of the most cartoonishly evil bad guys in film history, and
who meet a suitably cartoonish end.
Exactly. I mean, I missed the original watching when Rambo actually literally ripped someone's throat out with his with his bare hands. It's like, well, I'm not really sure this is acceptable entertainment, really. It seems a little bit exploitative. I say, when I watched it back in the day, I thought, well, this is kind of resolutely average, but fair play to Stallone for breaking these barriers and going and pushing out these films. But on retrospective viewing, it did seem really quite a nasty piece of work. It's quite cynically violent in places.
Yeah, I think he would probably have you prefer to believe that, well, look, I'm just depicting violence the way it is, and there's a case to be made for that. But when you're painting on a canvas the scale, a murderous canvas, the scale of Rambo, it kind of goes beyond making its point and sort of into the bizarre, and then full circle back round to being shocking again. It kind of is crazy. It kind of is crazy. I like to think he certainly proved his point that, right, there's life in the old dog yet. But I also think a lot of it is probably a reaction on these guys' part to, I mean, we were lucky enough to be in our formative years, right, when the action movie was in its heyday in the 80s, right? And we probably watched some crazy stuff happening at an age that we never should have done. And since then, the commercial viability of big studio films rests on as broad an audience as possible, and hence you have these films now which are pared down, well, sometimes in destructive scope, sometimes not, sometimes just without the blood, as I expect we'll probably talk about with some of the Expendables movies. It's quite alright to have a ludicrous body count, so long as you don't show the bullet hits. I think this is just a reaction to the shoehorning of a lot of the action genre being the shoehorning of the action genre into a PG-13/12A certificate now for commercial reasons. God damn it, you just don't get to see violence the way you used to do when we were young.
No, I mean, thinking about it, there's probably not a lot of things in Rambo that you wouldn't see in something like Commando, but somehow Commando features people getting their arms lopped off and the same sort of way that Rambo features people getting dissolved by anti-tank rounds in certain places.
Cut in half by 50 caliber.
There's an impressive amount of splash damage on the machine guns.
But in a way that when I go back and watch something like Commando, it doesn't feel quite so mean-spirited as Rambo does. I'm not quite sure where I'm getting that from, but it just has a certain tone that is just relentlessly grim and nasty to it.
I think because Commando was overly comical, right?
True.
I don't think intentionally, for the most part, but certainly it turned out to be, and I think that the ludicrous nature of it, whereas something like Rambo quite clearly sets out, and I think at the time my only concern with it, I mean it's fine, kind of what it does is fine, and there's an audience for that, but the bit that disturbed me about it was the when the young kid in the village gets bayoneted. Yeah. And by young kid I mean like 4 or 5 year old, which I feel like I think I made the comment at the time that I feel like you have to kind of work very hard to earn the right to show something like that, and I don't feel that this was the forum for it. But yeah, I suppose ironically enough, since then he's gone on to the Expendables franchise, right? Which the first entry, I think, a 15 certificate. Am I right?
Sounds about right.
And then the following entries 12s. I don't know. Someone talk about the Expendables.
The thing about the Expendables actually didn't sound like a bad idea. And I guess in total the franchise probably isn't, but the first one is a quite poor example of it. The first Expendables, it was R-rated in States. I can't remember if it was 15 or 18 over here, but
I'm sure it was a 15.
I think my main problem with Expendables, and certainly came apart when I watched it again the other week there, is that it just can't decide on a tone. It starts off with basically kind of being quite cartoonish as well. I mean, it's not too far into the film before I believe it's Dolph Lundgren's shotgun blasts someone in half again. And you get... I definitely got the impression that this was setting up for another Commando film. It was going to be a kind of a light-hearted romp as people go and murder their way through lots of enemies.
With ridiculously overpowered weaponry.
Yeah, and to be fair, maybe half of it is, but the other half is trying to be telling a relatively straight drama about oppression and CIA activity in a small island, and that falls not so much flat. I mean, it's not... neither half of those films is particularly bad, but when you cut and shut them together, the welding doesn't hold up quite so well. Of course, what the series is probably most famous for is its cast, and that will kind of go through with the rest of them. It follows through with these, finally, Sylvester Stallone, Jason Statham together at last, along with Jet Li, Dolph Lundgren, Randy Couture. In the first one, you've even got Steve Austin of wrestling fame.
I forget he was in the first one, actually. I
so
saw the first one quite some time ago now. I haven't had a chance to rewatch it before this podcast, but yeah, I'd completely forgotten he was in that.
I guess as a excuse to watch some of your favourite action stars from arguably from yesteryear, maybe not so much anymore, to get them together, I suppose it works on that level. But for me, the first one's probably the least effective of the whole franchise. It just doesn't quite have a clear idea of what it's trying to do.
I think what's missing from the first one, which the second two entries benefit from, in that they were obviously toned down by the studio to appeal to a wider audience, is that they kind of upped the fun quotient, the kind of nudge, wink, wink thing, and that actually serves those films better, I think, than the attempts at sort of camaraderie in the first movie, especially between Statham and Stallone, and with like Lundgren as this bizarre sort of outlier. Left field character, which is really quite odd, but I think the first film was sort of serviceable, and there's kind of a case to be made for it. I think it was a nice idea, and obviously that movie had at least had the good sense to be knowing in that, the whole point of this, the clues in the title, yes, we know we're old men, and this is kind of probably how we feel about our place in the movie industry right now. And I think at the time did Schwarzenegger cameo in the first one, or was that the second one?
Yes,
I think he did. He's not appear in some building towards the end.
Yes, he does.
He didn't have a bigger role until the second one, right? But even having like sort of a little Schwarzenegger cameo, because he was still very much ensconced as the governor of California at the time, and had given up acting, right?
Yes.
So it had a good idea, I think, the first movie, and it was certainly, I think, when it was announced, it was kind of like, yes, this actually, on some level, this actually makes perfect sense. I can't believe someone hasn't thought of this before.
Yeah, it's kind of like the action movie Supergroup.
Yeah, it put me in mind of the old proposition that there would be a Bond reunion film with all the old Bonds, where it would turn out that James Bond is just a code name and that these people all fulfilled the role at one point or another. Obviously that never came to fruition, and I doubt it ever will. That really will be old man action. But it's like, yes, why hasn't someone done this before? And actually an idea that has some potential. It was just kind of let down by, as you say, Scott, a real lack of direction and a not particularly great script. And honestly, I think sort of Stallone and Statham trying to riff off of each other. I think probably Statham does a better job than Stallone does, to be honest. That part of it kind of falls flat. But the second and third entries at least were a little bit more fun, I think. Yeah,
I think they've got a bit of clearer idea of where they want to shoot for, and a little bit more, as you say, levity. The relationships between characters does seem to actually get a bit better, as you might expect. I suppose they've had a bit more time, but they do seem a bit more believable. One of the problems with the first film as well was that it did have various sections that were clearly set up to give Steve Austin his moment, Randy Couture his moment, Jet Li his moment, and that still, to an extent, goes through the rest of them, but it's a bit more organic in the way that a lot of it feels. The second one, its plot is arguably a bit more stupid. I
don't even remember the plot.
This is the one with evil Jean-Claude Van Damme, who's coercing a village to run his uranium mines, and he's kidnapping the men, making them work, and kidnapping the children and making them work.
I don't remember that at all.
So that is really the setup, more or less, is that the Expendables have to go in to stop him from his warlord / kidnapping antics, and
they need to save him from himself.
Yes. And I think it works a lot better. It's clearly a dumber film, but it's much more enjoyable for that. Has a clearer idea of where it wants to go. Some pretty good action scenes. I think a lot of the heavy lifting is done by Jason Statham again, in terms of just keeping it likeable, but that's what Jason Statham does. That's why he's there. A lot of nice in-jokes. There's having Chuck Norris as well in it as the cast ever expand.
That's it, and larger roles for Bruce Willis and Schwarzenegger in this one, right?
Yes. Its only real weak spot is parachuting Liam Hemsworth in at the start and then killing him off in short order to try and make you care and have a reason to care about the rest of the film.
Yeah.
As if memory serves, this is where Jean-Claude Van Damme spin kicks a knife into his chest to kill him, which of course is something you cannot do.
The most efficient and practical methods of execution. I can't believe that never took off in the States as one of the options for state execution. You have the chair, you can have hanging, lethal injection, firing squad, Van Damme spin kick with a knife. Yeah, I'll go for that one, it sounds great.
It's how he wanted to go out.
That's it. Sorry, Van Damme's ill at the moment. Would you prefer Swayze to rip your throat out?
So, I mean, for me, a lot of the second one is basically what the first one, in my mind, should have been. The third one, perhaps, is pushing it a little bit too far, but it still works in terms of being an entertaining film, if not a good one.
Well, the third one works hard to set up the sort of the next generation now, doesn't it? Which will kind of defeat, if that's what happens, that will kind of defeat the purpose of the Expendables, because they will no longer be old and decrepit. You're talking about people like Ronda Rousey and who else is in there? Their names have just gone right out of my head.
There are not a lot of guys I know. I know Victor Ortiz.
That's right, Victor Ortiz.
What has he got? You got Glenn Powell, but I can't remember. I think what else he's been in. Kellen Lutz. The new cast is certainly nothing like as recognisable as the old hands.
No. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with that there. Although what I will say for the third one, like ludicrous body count aside, for a 12-star scale, it didn't even really sink in at the time. It was the next morning after I got out of bed. My first thought after getting out of bed, having watched that the night before, was, Jesus, that film had a body count. For a 12 certificate film. I think this is the biggest proponent of this debate to be had around, look, what really is the difference between something like, honestly, how much of a difference does showing bullet hits make? We can clearly see what's happening to these people. If anything, I mean, some of the violence is probably more realistic, because when you shoot people with a handgun, they don't tend to explode in great red gobs. They tend to sort of fall over without much visible damage. And so in many ways the violence portrayed in this film is far more realistic than a film of a higher rating. And I think something of a body count over 200 or something, if I remember the IMDb facts page correctly. It's insane. It's utterly insane. 3 was probably the most enjoyable as far as I remember it of the trilogy. I think overall, as you say, Scott, it's kind of stretching some of the aspects of it a bit too far. And also there's a huge question mark over why the hell did Jet Li even bother to turn up when his entire role in the film lasts about 2 minutes and it's him in a helicopter with a machine gun. He doesn't utilise his martial arts skills at any point. Very odd. I can only assume that was a tax dodge or something. Yeah, a great deal of fun. But so 2 questions: why are we allowed to show this to an audience of 12-year-olds when it's quite insanely violent? And B, when are we going to forgive Mel Gibson? Because he was actually pretty good in this.
Yeah, well, it was very difficult to forgive Mel Gibson because he's such an asshole.
Absolutely, but the guy is a charismatic presence, and at some point, surely, either we have to put our foot down and go, no, you just can't be in films at all, or we acknowledge that he's been penitent and let's just let him have some fun again, because the guy's for obviously all of his ills aside, he's a hoot, and he's a genuinely charismatic screen presence. And I mean, as limited as his role in this is, he is the most fun thing in it. And I think he's one of the best things in it, and I kind of feel like we can start to give him an opportunity again. Well,
it's the old thing of whether you can hold an artist separate from his actual persona, his artist separate from his persona, which is something you struggle with, particularly a lot of writers, because a lot of writers tend to have, they can produce very good books, but then they also turn around and be absolute
abysmal
crazy
humans.
People.
Yeah, Orson Scott Card, for instance.
Yeah, absolutely,
exactly the person I was thinking of.
Yeah,
and I don't know. Mel Gibson's has his mistakes, but it seems like a lot of them are just rooted in being drunk. So
yes,
maybe we can forgive him. And there's certainly a number of very obnoxious drunk-based actors who wind up still getting roles, like maybe Russell Crowe, who's another appalling person, but a good actor. So maybe it is time. Maybe it's time we just have an amnesty for poor old Mel.
I think so. And obviously, as Scotsman, he's given us, in particular, such such an important cinematic legacy.
Such a cultural milestone.
Absolutely.
Or millstone, maybe.
With his historically impeccable presentation of Braveheart. Yeah, but that aside, I mean, am I alone in thinking probably 3 is probably the most fun instalment?
It's probably the biggest, it's the most flashy. Possibly, I think 2's marginally better, but they both are what they are, and what they are is fun, brainless action movies. You could barely distinguish between the 2 on that basis for my thinking.
There you go.
I suppose while we're sticking on the subject of Stallone, I kind of glossed over the slightly earlier example would be Rocky Balboa, which I didn't put on because that is a film that is very clearly making hay out of him being old. It's the central tenet of it. So that kind of doesn't quite count. But of course he's had other films in the intervening time. Things like his other appearance with Sylvester Stallone in Escape Plan.
Oh, you mean with Schwarzenegger?
Schwarzenegger.
Which we did want to talk about for this, right?
Well, I mean, we are going to talk about it. Whether we want to or not is perhaps another thing entirely.
Yes.
But it's got Vinnie Jones in it. It's therefore brilliant.
Absolutely.
I get it.
Well, we can testify to that with the Steven Seagal commentary we recorded earlier, which we may put out as a subsequent commentary podcast after this episode, or we may not. Yeah, it's got Vinnie Jones in it, Drew. Of course, that is the gold standard. The gold standard. Yeah, Escape Plan then, in which a very improbably plotted film, Stallone plays a prison security advisor, I think is the best way to put him, a published author on prison security and prison design, whose job apparently is to go around being incarcerated in prisons and then proving that he can break his way out of them, which I'm not sure is intended as a service or an ego trip for him. And I can't even remember I can't remember the reasons why, but there's some sort of double cross, and he finds himself in Money.
It's always money, and it was money.
Reason M, he finds himself incarcerated and his contacts on the outside detached from him, and with no way to communicate the fact that he is there purely on a work basis. He finds himself simply stuck among the prison population of a maximum security plexiglass, silly, futuristic, daft maximum plexiglass security prison. It was an interesting film. I quite wish I hadn't watched this in the same night as Furious 7, because that, as it turns out, will be a night to remember for all the wrong reasons in my cinematic history.
That's quite the double bill.
It certainly is. Not one I would recommend anyone undertake. But yeah, I was hoping this was going to be in the same line of The Expendables. Sort of, obviously I knew going into it not to expect too much, and boy did it underdeliver. I hoped it might at least be a good amount of fun, but then I realised I hadn't obviously known before that Jim Caviezel was on the cast. Another gold standard there, Vinnie Jones, and bizarrely Sam Neill trying to eke out some dignity from a role as a prison doctor, in which he's afforded very little opportunity to do anything other than try and look sympathetic and anguished and conflicted.
And one of the worst turns from Vincent D'Onofrio I've seen in a long time.
Oh, of course, I forgot Vincent D'Onofrio, who really, really has just painted eyeballs on his eyelids in this, right?
Yes.
He just kind of sits there and sleep talks throughout. He is so disinterested in this, it is palpable. But I don't know. I mean, are there any merits to this film? I want to say it didn't get terrible reviews at the time, so which is kind of why I thought, well, it can't be all that bad. But it's not that it was risible. It was just
it was resoundingly average, and it got to the point where a lot of the plot twists that it was coming up with are just. It's just for the sake of it, and it didn't really make any sense or change anything about anything. It was just there about, oh look, haven't we tricked you? So, well, not really, but if you feel that way, go ahead. But yeah, it was not a horrible experience watching this. It just didn't really work on a number of levels. I mean, particularly the double act between Stallone and Schwarzenegger just had no charisma at all. These guys were not bouncing off each other very well at all.
No, which was obviously the intention of it.
I mean, if they had, I mean, I don't know. Maybe there's other situations where you put these two together in a room and they're lively up and they're charismatic and conversation goes freely between them. But the way this is written, it really doesn't. And
here's the thing. I think it's mainly Stallone's fault. And the reason I say that is because I watched this after I watched Expendables 3, and actually more so than in the other Expendables films, I realised that Schwarzenegger's actually quite a funny guy, and he doesn't have a problem lampooning himself. And actually, and while Stallone probably is quite happy to poke fun at himself sort of knowingly, he won't do it in an outlandish way. There are points in the Expendables 3. There's a bit where Schwarzenegger is on the helicopter and he shouts something. I can't remember something. It's probably something. Oh no! It's when he greets them all on the roof on the stairwell towards the end. Good morning.
Good morning. Let's get to the chopper. Let's go.
And like, he's outlandish. He's absolutely unhinged in places. He looks absolutely manic. And I think actually he's proven himself to be quite a willingly comic character, and I actually really quite enjoyed aspects of that. And I think he's proven himself more capable by this point of that sort of thing than Stallone has. So although only one of them has an Oscar under his belt, and by the way, what a year that must have been following Rocky, when people realised that his performance as a mumbling, stuttering clown was, it's just that he's a mumbling, stuttering clown, all right. It's not an acting performance then. At the very least, I think Schwarzenegger's up for some fun, whereas he managed to not have any fun whatsoever in this, as far as I could tell, and that's what it sorely, sorely needed. My abiding memory of this will be, how can you make a film with that premise of a guy whose job it is to get stuck in prisons to prove that he can break his way out, stuck in a prison under some sort of nefarious circumstances. He doesn't know how the circumstances have arisen, but he now has to find his way out without the customary help or the customary knowledge and support from the outside. And how do you make it that dull? There's actually a really good movie to be had here, and for some reason it makes several decisions to make certain aspects of the film needlessly overblown and unrealistic, just to take you out of it, such as the stupidly sort of futuristic design of the prison and various other elements of it, and sort of weird sort of flamboyant touches around the ward, and etc. etc. There are just all these strange little things that really it would have been better served without. And yeah, so like quite a missed opportunity actually.
Yeah, there's something in there. That's perhaps why it doesn't fall apart quite so much, but it's just not executed particularly well. None of the cast really stand out. It's, in my mind, it's not a bad cast here at all. It's just a cast that really hasn't been given either the motivation or the opportunity or the wherewithal to actually come up with anything memorable.
Yeah.
So,
well, they're not working from the best material, are they?
No.
I don't know. Who do we want to talk about next?
There's sort of three kind of archetypes in this. One is, as we're going to discuss with Stallone, he's someone who stepped away from the action arena and then came back. There's guys who really just never stopped. We just stopped paying attention to them. Guys like, as we mentioned, guys like, well, Dolph Lundgren for one, and of course guys like Steven Seagal. They've kept on doing really the same stuff and never walked away from it. Just we have walked away from it. Then there's another case of guys who never were really known as action stars, who all of a sudden now seems to be all they do. And I'm thinking in this instance of Liam Neeson, who when he started his action career, was mainly doing straight roles. There's normally, I guess, some small level of physicality involved in it there, but I mean, certainly these days he's now perhaps one of the most prominent action stars that's around at the minute.
Yeah,
off the back of the Taken franchise.
Well, I mean, let's remember that the guy began his career in any sort of shape or form as not as an actor but as a boxer. So perhaps the more surprising thing is that he went into movies in a more serious, dramatic sense. And fair play to him. So perhaps we shouldn't be as surprised that he would at some point take on the mantle of an action star. It's maybe just that we wouldn't have expected it to happen at this stage in his or at this age. Yeah, exactly. So certainly Taken is a long way from Schindler's List, isn't it? Well, in some respects, Scott.
Yes, in a few critical aspects. So I mean, I guess the Taken franchise, probably more than anything else, is part of why we're sitting around talking about this. The quite ludicrous revenge fantasy of the first one, where Brian Mills, an ex-CIA black ops kind of fella, a fixer, is taken. His life is thrown upside down when
a man with a very particular set of skills.
Yes, when his daughter is kidnapped by a human trafficking ring in Paris. And so Liam Neeson goes to Paris and kills anyone who gets in his way.
Mostly Middle Eastern people.
Yes, a surprising number of them who are knocking around. Very successful. I remember watching it and thinking it was okay at the time. I probably still just about think the first one can get away with it, but it is a very grim in places film. It has no real grounding in reality, shall we put it that way. It is clearly a daft film.
That's why it was so entertaining. I did watch it again recently. I didn't like it quite so much, but I remember just thinking it was quite high concept, but fairly simple and suitably crunchy.
I remember us having a discussion at the time, and I think I deviated from you guys, and I just thought it was absolutely terrible to begin with. And I've never seen any redeeming quality in this movie. I'm not quite sure why, whether or not it's just that people have a fondness for Liam Neeson and it bought him some favour. I know people talk about, Taken 2 was terrible, Taken 3 was even worse. I'm like, really? Because I thought Taken was a pretty low benchmark to begin with. I honestly don't find it satisfying at all. I think a film which is so imaginative in its script that has a man go to Paris and utter the line, I'll tear the Eiffel Tower down if I have to, Jean-Claude, because that's how original it is in both its geographical reference and how far they could be bothered coming up with authentic French names for characters. There's a Jean-Claude, and I'm pretty sure there's a Pierre in there as well.
Alchanza Uralise Jean-Claude.
Exactly, yes. I'll pap your noof the new. I'll pap you on denoof. Yeah, I struggle to understand why. And in many respects, I know we touched base with Rambo first of all, but I think Taken followed that, right? Was Taken after Rambo?
Both 2008. I couldn't tell you offhand which one.
Because I want to say this was actually the tipping point in this for more people, because I think this film certainly has broader recognition than Rambo did. I think this, more than any other, is perhaps responsible for the studios taking an interest in this kind of thing, because Rambo itself wasn't a massive commercial success, I don't think. No. Whereas Taken is one of those films that I'm not sure what the cinema run was like, but certainly on home formats, it's very, very much the Shawshank Redemption of cheap action films.
Taken budget estimated at 25 million. Its gross was 145 million US plus whatever it does after
God
that.
God knows what worldwide. Yeah. So that's a nice healthy return. If you, what was it, one third production, one third marketing, and then if you make your third. If you round the circle off at 3 times the original budget, you've broken even. Is that the metric these days?
Seems about right, yeah.
3 times budget to be declared even vaguely successful, I think. So it's certainly scored in that respect. And I want to say that more than anything else convinced studios to actually start giving money to scripts which were some of which probably had been knocking around for a while and had just been thrown in a drawer and gone, what, the guy's 60, what are you talking about? Or perhaps they sort of brought them back out after this and went, well, the character was originally 20, but why don't we give it to 90-year-old Harrison Ford to do? I just never saw any merit in the first Taken film at all, but I'm willing to concede that I could well be wrong on that, because I seem to be in the minority.
Well, as you alluded to, Taken 2, not the most well-regarded film,
largely
bothered. Because it is much sillier.
Also, so just before you carry on, Scott, it's a really important point about Taken 2. The first film, at least in this country, was in 18. It was very violent. The violence was
arguably less violent than Expendables 3, but
the violence of Taken was A, the point, and B, the appeal. That's why that film worked, why it was entertaining, why it was popular. And so for the second film, they reduced the violence, reduced the rating, and brought in a director who has stated publicly several times he doesn't like violent films. I'm just speechless. I don't understand the thinking behind that.
No, if you don't like violent films, you should never have taken this job on anyway. You clearly have no integrity.
Yeah, which is unusual given the kind of films he chooses to direct.
Yeah.
I don't like violent films. I know I'll do Transporter 3. Okay, Olivier Megaton, if that is your real name. Which I doubt. Yeah, Taken 2 is essentially the same crap, but in Istanbul. My abiding memory of it, I chose not to go back and rewatch this, so my abiding memory of it remains the grenade-based echolocation that is used at one point, which is a bit of a nadir for action cinema as a whole, in my estimation. Yes, it is essentially a retread of everything that the first film did, but not as good, and is rightly slated along those lines. So, yeah, certainly not one I can possibly recommend.
Boo. And Taken 3, which again I just haven't given any consideration to. I refuse to watch.
Taken 3, you could certainly make a case for it being better than Taken 2. It is.
AIDS is slightly better than cancer.
Its main problem is that it's not really a Taken film in any notable sense. It has a very different structure, to the point where it is basically a kind of different film with the same characters. It's a rather more straightforward tale. In this one, he's more accused of a murder that he didn't commit, and he's trying to clear his own name. But it doesn't have quite the same driving impact of, his family being in danger or anything like that. It's not quite so, driven in that regard. Also a bit of a downer as our favourite Doug Ray Scott has returned.
Yeah,
this time playing the
fresh off MI2.
Yes.
I literally don't know of a film that he's been in between.
In this instance, Doug Ray Scott is not the best thing about a film. In many ways, he's the least thing about the film.
Boo.
So that's a bit of a pest, because given he does play a very pivotal role in it, certainly towards the end of the film.
Yeah.
Basically, Liam Neeson has been tracked down by Forrest Whitaker as the cop, and he's on the trail of him, and it just kind of becomes a relatively standard manhunt film. It's not a million miles away from something like The Fugitive in terms of what it's trying to do, and just not doing it quite so effectively. It's fine. I think it's reasonably entertaining. It's certainly much better than 2. It bears almost no relation to 1, but it's still a fine enough film to pass the 90 minutes or whatever the running time is. But is difficult to get very worked up about it.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone else has watched that From the Mind of Luc Besson.
From the mind. Remember when that used to be something you look forward to?
Yeah, and then there was Lucy.
Yes, there was. While we're on a Neeson tip, then, did we want to talk about Run All Night?
Yes, I mean,
which for me was an arguably better example of the genre than any of his. Well, I say any of his taken films. I've only seen the one, so it'd be disingenuous to say that. But it was at least enjoyable and I think probably about as well done as this kind of thing can be.
Yeah, I mean, Neeson, he was always mixing up his roles. There's for every one garbage action film he's done, there's been some big budget garbage like Wrath of the Titans and Battleship. But there's been the odd sort of low budget thing that's worked really well, like The Grey.
The Grey and even non-action related stuff like I suppose Kinsey and whatnot, right?
Yeah, so at least I think the Run All Night falls into the kind of, it falls kind of between the indie and action films too, so it's kind of I guess a sweet spot for him. He's a ex-mafia hitman, now a drunk estranged from his kid, who winds up having to go up against his boss after his boss's son tries to frame his son for a murder. It's more or less how that works out, and so again it's just a chase drama more than anything else, as he's running across New York trying to keep his kid out of danger. And I think this one works quite well. Again, another pretty solid cast. Liam Neeson, Ed Harris and Joel Kinnaman, all of whom do very well. Nice to see Bruce McGill every now and again.
Yeah.
And again, Vincent D'Onofrio, the second appearance for him. But yeah, it's a solid cast. It takes something that is probably a fairly generic script. I can't think of any immediately, but I'm sure I've seen things like this before.
Someone said to me recently, it's literally just a remake of, and the film's gone right out of my head.
West Side Story. Sharks and Jets.
No, so not necessarily a remake of, but I remember what it is. It's very, very close in plot to the
Sharknado 2.
Road to Perdition.
Right, okay.
Which I can see certain elements of, although I'd argue that's a massively, massively better film.
Yes.
But
that would not be a controversial argument, I don't think. But
no, but sometimes you talk about a film being serviceable in sort of in a downhearted way, or certainly in a perfunctory way, whereas this is kind of serviceable, but in that good way. Where it's hard to imagine having been done a lot better. It kind of makes the most of the material at hand. Crucially for me, like I remember a time when Ed Harris's name on a billing was again like pretty much a seal of approval, right? A seal of quality. And arguably that's not been true in recent years. He's one of those actors who you thought would never sort of betray his own integrity, but clearly has with any number of direct-to-video appearances and schlock stuff over recent years. And here, while he sort of appears as this character who, with this sort of violent past, who just looks tired and basically just wants a quiet life, that kind of plays into his hands as an actor at this point, because the best thing he does now is act tired and in want of a quiet life. So it would have been very easy for him to have dialed in his performance in this movie, and to his credit, he kind of doesn't. He kind of at least puts a bit of effort into it, and I want to say that more than anything else carries this. But certainly there are some interesting elements to the film. It sounds very perfunctory on paper, but it's surprisingly effective as a thriller, actually. And I think because a lot of the people involved are, like you say, like a cast of reasonably well-known names, but there's no one A-list here apart from Neeson himself. Actually, it keeps you guessing, because one or two things happen in this film and you think to yourself, well, I wouldn't put it past this film for it not to end the way I'm expecting it to end.
Yeah.
So it does at least sort of keep you guessing a little bit.
Yeah, and the director, Jean-Colette Serra, has done a number of films that have actually been relatively well regarded, and he's come a long way from House of Wax in 2005. But I don't think I've seen Non-Stop, but I don't recall that being too badly received. But Unknown back in 2011 was also, again, a fairly generic
and a bit far-fetched, yeah.
But again, quite effective. He knows how to pace things well enough, and this is.
You can kind of plot an arc there right through those films. I haven't seen Non-Stop, but as you say, if I take it on faith, you can see the sort of process by which he's sort of distilled his technique down to the point where in this it's kind of it's not cookie cutter, it's not a template thing, but it's very, very efficient.
Yes.
There's not a lot of fat on this, and it's reasonably interesting visually. I feel like effort has been put into this, even if it's not the greatest film that's ever been made. I kind of feel that a sincere level of effort has been made on all parts, both the cast and the crew, and that no one's just taken this for the paycheck, which you might have otherwise expected. But yeah, surprisingly effective, and I enjoyed it far more than I expected to. I didn't actually have all that many intentions to watch it until my wife announced that she would quite like to see it. So I thought, yeah, we don't get to sit and watch much stuff together these days. So come on, let's pop it on. And I was pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, I found it a very engaging watch. I've no regrets about seeing it. It's one of the better films, I think, of the ones we've been talking about. It's as we've said, nothing outstandingly new or original, but it works very well at what it's trying to do. Yeah,
and the first film that I've knowingly seen Joel Kinnaman in as well, because I haven't yet seen the RoboCop remake. So, and he was perfectly good in this. Not Oscar standards, but he did as much as was required by the script. He did it very efficiently and very well. So I shall pay attention to more of his work in future.
Yeah, certainly this is a much better film than RoboCop was. So yeah, it's got that going for it, but that's not really saying very much.
Maybe a future podcast there, stop remaking my childhood.
Yes, I can see that happening. So who else have we got? We've talked about Liam Neeson, Sylvester Stallone. I suppose we can't skip over Arnie. We've already mentioned him a few times. He, of course, took a break for entirely different reasons, as he was off governating. And yeah, he's now recently returned to the fold. I spoke at least in a previous podcast about the latest Terminator film, which he has returned to with mixed results, but you certainly can't keep him down. Perhaps not much point going over that again, but he's been in other films, I guess. I think most of us we've all seen, and certainly me and Drew have seen the Last Stand, which was probably his first return to the...
I haven't watched it yet. This is the one with Johnny Knoxville, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and a ridiculously large gun.
A large gun, how unusual. How queer.
Yeah, so that was very much his first one, as a small town sheriff who stands up to the leader of a Mexican cartel when one of their leaders busts out of prison. I forget exactly which, but they're on a crash course straight through his small town, and he decides to put up some barriers to stop him. And it's very small in scope, but it's surprisingly quite effective in what it does. It's difficult to defend the casting of Johnny Knoxville in anything, really. I
don't know. Bad Grandpa was really rather good.
Yeah, I suppose there is that. It's something that surprisingly worked quite well. Not again the most A-list cast you can imagine. I mean, I guess the biggest star after Arnie is probably Luis Guzman in it. It worked quite well for what it did. It was certainly by no means Arnie's greatest film, but it displayed a reasonable amount of charisma and a few decent action scenes, so fair play to him for that. It's certainly seen far worse films, and for him to come back from a long period of absence with this, it works quite well. Directed by Ji-Woon Kim, who we'll know most from things like A Tale of Two Sisters, and of course I Saw the Devil, which is one of the most ludicrous films I've seen in some time.
Ludicrous, depressing, downbeat.
That's a director we may have to come back to at some point. Things like, was that one, A Bittersweet Life? He's got The Good, the Bad, the Weird. He does some very interesting films. This is arguably the least interesting of them, in as much as it's fairly almost grounded in reality compared to what he's done previously. But yeah, interesting director, but maybe not one of his most interesting films. Yeah, so it looks like Arnie's back. Terminator Genesis aside, he's clearly back in the count. He's rumoured to be going up for The Legend of Conan now, which is...
Wow.
I'm not sure how that'll work out.
I'm not sure it will.
Badly.
Let's see if that's going to be better or worse than the other thing he's up for, which is Triplets, where he reprises his role as Julius Benedict in Twins.
Is the Conan thing just going to be him sitting in like a Christmas jumper on a rocking chair with a brandy, sort of laughing away and reminiscing about his time as Conan?
Let me tell you about the legend.
What is best in life is preparation H. I imagine that's how it goes.
And to hear somebody, your enemies say, "Would you like a nice cup of tea, Arnold?"
Oh, I'd love a nice cup of tea. Wouldn't that be nice? It's a stupid question. Who wouldn't like a nice cup of tea?
I've missed a reference there somewhere again.
Like, we're making up our own references. Charging forward. One of the guys, certainly someone who's never stopped working, but is really not someone who you'd perhaps have for action roles these days would be Harrison Ford, but he just keeps making movies.
He does.
Well, he's been in quite a few things that have had some degree of action, but I suppose the one that's in recent terms that is the most obvious would be Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull, as he returns to that franchise, and to much disappointment all around.
Well, look, the merits of the film aside, of which there are none, let's just set that stall out very early. What a travesty of a film. Even at the point at which that came out in 2008, so what, the same year as, did we say Rambo was the same year?
Yes.
Taken?
Yes.
So even at that point, out of all the people we're talking about, even then he easily looked the most frail and incapable at this kind of thing of any of the people we're talking about tonight. And that for me is the most damning thing. So Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, for many, many reasons, is inferior to the rest of the Indiana Jones franchise.
I mean, just on that, we did mention it at the time, but I mean, part of the reason that the Arnold Schwarzenegger films and the Sylvester Stallone films still work is that these guys look like they could quite easily rip their head off.
Oh, they're still in clearly better physical shape than I'll ever be.
Oh yeah, absolutely amazing shape.
Yes, I wouldn't spill any of their pints.
Yeah, whereas Harrison Ford looks more like you would expect someone of his age to look.
Yes, like you could take him with one hand tied behind your back. Yeah. And the other hand, clutching a copy of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, shouting, "Why, Harrison? Why?" And perhaps the most disturbing thing is that they're still touting the fact that there may be a fifth Indiana Jones as well, involving Harrison Ford, which I just cannot at this point believe. I cannot believe. So let's just hope that never comes to fruition. Yeah, very much the indicator of what can go wrong with old man action. I think this film clearly beyond his capabilities in terms of the physical requirements of the role, and also his sort of what I perceive to be his tiredness as a human being and his tiredness with the movie game, meaning that the edge has been taken off the sort of the pithy comic aspect of his character, the smart ass persona, very much muted in this, and his engagement with other characters suitably underwhelming, whereas that has actually been the stock in trade of the franchise up to this point, and so much of it is Ford's obvious charisma when he's firing on all cylinders, as he did in the previous three films. This was by far and away the most disappointing return to action movies for any of the people we've spoken about tonight, in my opinion. Yeah,
it often seems like Ford's got 2 seconds. He's either very charismatic or essentially dead. And this is closer to the second half of this one, isn't it? I cut this film every possible bit of slack I could to try and like it, because you're
a better human being than I am.
Well, I just had the expectation going in that it won't be the same, but it could at least be good enough. And I think probably the structure of it and the actual bones of it, taken as an academic exercise, there's nothing in here that's more or less ridiculous than you had in all the other films, but it just isn't any fun, really, when you put it back in. And because it's no fun, it can't get away with the same things that other installments might have been able to. I mean, in other films, might have let it get away with things like Shia LaBeouf fella swinging across the jungle with his army of baboons behind him. But it just looked a bit. It just seemed a bit silly in this film. And things like Ray Winston's constant flip flopping as whether he's to whose side he's on didn't really. It
didn't ratchet up any tension, really. Just disinterest.
Poor old John Hurt's just reduced to ranting in a corner.
Ever so slightly distracted, because all I could think of was that bloody gopher. But have you mentioned the accent? Or the accents? Not one of which is from the planet Earth.
Kate Blanchett, the psychic Nazi.
Yes. There's not really much more to say than it's incredibly terrible.
Yeah, I mean, it's properly.
Sorry, stop, Drew. Stop. Back up. I said the third eye of the Third Reich. I'm quite proud of that. Sorry, it's taken me 7 years to think of it, but
and those years have been wasted.
Back to the drawing board, eh? Yeah, no, there were a multitude of things wrong with that movie, but a committed performance from a Harrison Ford 20 years younger might have carried it. Unfortunately, on this occasion, it did not.
Harrison Ford believing in the script might have done it, I think.
Yeah.
But it seems to me that that was part of it, that he simply didn't believe in the script, because, I mean, I remember at the time thinking, Aliens, this is stupid. Then thinking, wait a minute, I've seen the other films. It's not any more or less stupid. It's just the way it was handled, I think. Oh, plus the gophers and the CGI monkeys and Kate Blanchett's accent.
I find you can let away with the other films with their preposterous endings because they've built up so much goodwill by being brilliant all the way throughout the rest of it.
Yeah, exactly.
And it is not something you get in this from the outset. It is designed to basically just be kind of silly. I mean, I as you mentioned, Drew, I cannot understand why they put that gopher in. What is the point of this stupid obsession with CG gophers?
I don't know if I'd call it an obsession because it's the only one in the movie, but
it was given more prominent screen time than a lot of the main characters, and I don't understand it.
Well, the thing that annoyed me about it, of course, we spoke about it at the time, was that Spielberg had gone out of his way to say that, look, this will be a film of practical stunts and as little as CG as possible, and it opens with a bad CG shot of an unnecessary gopher and only gets worse from there. My abiding memory of this film will always be that after we saw that in Glasgow together, the three of us, I drove back down here a couple of days later, and then I was through in Manchester in the Trafford Centre, and I went to HMV and I picked up the box set of the Indiana Jones on DVD up until that point, and I took it to the counter, and the young lady who served me asked, "Have you seen the new film?" And I said, yes I have, and that's why I'm buying this now before it becomes 4 discs.
So I guess for all our sanities, we should perhaps move on from this catastrophe before we start talking about his impending role in the next Star Wars film, which I don't think anyone's looking forward to. Let's circle back to good old Bruce Willis. We'll maybe chat a little bit about Denzel Washington first.
Oh yeah, I'd almost forgotten our Denzel.
Yeah, because again, another guy who you would not necessarily have pegged as being an action star. I mean, The Pelican Brief, Philadelphia, all these kind of things. And
probably not now.
Yeah. And
I felt like Man on Fire would have been his last kind of role in that kind of vein.
Yep, but he keeps putting these things on, things like The Extent, American Gangster, Taking a Pelham 1, 2, 3. Book of Eli was quite action focused and also terrible.
Awful. Truly awful, yes.
Yeah. So I mean, he's still mixing in things like Flight, which is a bit more character heavy and certainly much better film. But I think perhaps what we're most interested in here is not the together at last Denzel Washington and Mark Wahlberg outing Two Guns, but The Equalizer of 2014, which due for a sequel soon. But he's taken up the role of Edward Woodward as he puts together his past to help out communities. And I was surprised at how well this worked. One of Antoine Fuqua's outings, and I was pleasantly surprised by how good it is. Fuqua himself is a guy who's had a fairly up and down, in my opinion, relationship with the quality of his films, but I think The Equalizer is certainly one of his better films.
I think it helps. We've said this several times, I think, over the years, but Denzel Washington is somebody who's very reliably good, but more importantly, he is one of those people who is always able to rise above the quality of the material he's in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Not that The Equalizer was by any means terrible, but it could have been fairly ordinary without him, but he can lift everything, and it doesn't help that he somehow looks 20 years younger than he actually is. Helping to sell his action man role, but it's just, there's something about Denzel Washington, and it's more than simply acting ability. I think a lot is charisma, which is obviously much harder to define, unless you're Dennis Quaid, of course, in which it's quite easy to define because you define it as none.
Where did that come from, man?
Not that you stand as my Christmas yardstick at all or anything, you know. But
any opportunity to stick the knife into Quaid is
whatever.
Drew's certainly up for it.
I have to disagree with you guys. I was really disappointed by this, and I thought he pretty much phoned in his performance. I think if anything works about this, it's his physical presence. I didn't find him to rise above the script at all. I think a large problem with this film is that it's almost half an hour too long. It needed to be much shorter, but it was kind of very ploddingly paced and unsatisfying, and the violence when it arrived in most places felt kind of just nasty. There was stuff in there that I felt I'm really puzzled as to why they felt the need to make this the Equalizer, because it bears no semblance whatsoever to the source material, being the Edward Woodward TV series, pretty much in anything other than name. And it, this is a guy who goes out of his way to help people, because last I recalled, McCall was a guy who ran an agency who people, who advertised in a newspaper and people came to, but that's what this film seems to be setting up, or it hints at in the end.
Yeah.
But for me, this was just really, I thought this was really bog standard fare. I actually enjoyed Run All Night far more than I enjoyed this, and for his talents, because Denzel Washington really is one of those rare actors who combines a physicality that suits him well in roles like this, with the sort of acting capabilities that he's displayed in films like Do the Right Thing, and most recently, I suppose, in Flight. He is really one of the most versatile actors there has been for a generation, and I just didn't feel like he was invested in this at all. And I thought it probably below average on Antoine Fuqua's. Oh no, actually, I forget Olympus has fallen. You're right, this is above average for Antoine.
He has a few millstones dragging his average down, doesn't he?
He really does, actually. I'd forgotten about that.
I found this tremendously engaging, I guess mainly because Denzel Washington did seem quite engaged with it. I thought he looked like he was having a good time for most of this, and I thought that carried through to most of the action in it. It certainly could. I do agree. It could do with being somewhat shorter. It does have a few points that might drag a little bit, but on the whole, I thought the cast did quite well. Got a reasonably effective bad guy in Marton Sokogas. I'm not
Chokas.
sure
that's right.
Chokas, I believe, or something quite close to that anyway.
Who was, in fairness, suitably menacing.
Yeah.
Although the very final act of this film, the denouement of this, if we are supposed to believe that a man such as he somehow found his way into the personal abode of a heavily guarded Russian oligarch to carry out the kind of mayhem that he did, is pushing the boat out a little, stretching credibility a little too far. But there you go. I found the rest of it to be a bit silly, to be honest with you, but there you go.
I can see that. So I guess we'll round things off by talking about your boy, Bruce Willis.
My boy.
I believe is Craig's favourite human.
He certainly used to be. I'm not so sure about that in latter years. But keep in mind that I am the person who absolutely adores Hudson Hawk. So I've been a fan of Bruce Willis since I can remember. He's very much my role model for having lost my hair with dignity. He is the reason why at a certain point I just went, shave it off. He was very much the in mind when I did that.
You're very much forgetting Bandits then.
Which I've only watched about the first half hour of, and then I decided my feelings for Bruce are better served by pretending that film didn't happen. I'm not the biggest fan of Cate Blanchett either, to be honest with you, so I had all sorts of compelling reasons to press stop.
Bruce falls into that category of person who just never stopped.
No.
He's had a much greater hit rate of producing something that is not dreadful throughout that time, so he's never really stopped making action films. The two, I guess, obvious ones to talk about in this context is Red and Red 2, simply because the whole premise of him being a retired CIA agent and all that kind of thing gels quite well with him. They are both comic book adaptations, and I think work quite well. They are suitably ludicrously over the top, but I found both of them to be an incredible amount of fun. I don't think there's a lot of mileage in talking about them, but I think they work quite well for what they set out to do. Both quite amusing, clearly comedy action rather than action, by itself. There's not an awful lot of drama to be had in there, but there's a good few laughs and a good, interesting number of action.
What's interesting about those films is that he is arguably one of the weaker links in it, though, because I don't feel like he displays his trademark. Well, not trademark, but he can certainly be a very charismatic and funny guy. He's got comedy in his roots, and I feel like he could have done better in both of these movies, to be honest with you. I feel like he maybe wasn't as invested as he could have been, and they could have been better films if, again, he had been firing on even half of his cylinders, or just over half of them. I'm not sure how many cylinders he has, so I'm not going to go into more detail than that. I'm already trying to rationalise a very silly statement. I feel like he could have made a bigger effort, and that bizarrely he is probably the weaker link in this. I look at someone like John Malkovich and just how insanely invested he is in playing an absolute, and I mean, he's a guy who you'd never expect in your life to phone in a performance or have any time for this kind of nonsense whatsoever, and even he seems willing to make to poke fun at himself, whereas I found Bruce Willis a little bit earnest, and a little bit more of the moonlighting, wisecracking Bruce would have served this a little bit better.
Yeah, he's a little po-faced in some of it, it's fair to say, I think.
Yeah, but very entertaining films, actually, and probably greater than the sum of their parts, to be honest. I mean, their impressive cast list aside, again, not the greatest of scripts in most cases and whatnot, but yes, entertaining. I mean, we can't just skip over A Good Day to Die Hard, right?
Much as you would like to.
No, as even I would want to, yes.
Yeah, I mean, his two most recent kind of big budget things would have been Looper, which we've
of course
in a previous podcast life we've kind of discussed to death. But I don't think there's much to bones with about Bruce Willis's performance in that film. I think he does
he
quite
himself
well.
Described it as at the time as the best thing he'd ever done, right? Which I think is paying short thrift to 12 Monkeys, which I think is equally as good, if not even better. But it was the best thing that he's done by a country mile, I think, in recent years, even if the film itself disappointed me in some respects.
Yes, and A Good Day to Die Hard, of course, the latest in the instalment. I still stand by the fact that I don't think Die Hard 4.0 or Live Free or Die Hard or whatever you want to call it was that bad. I thought
it was good. It was
especially
good
given it's directed by Len Wiseman. It was actually quite passable.
It was probably the best thing he's done.
Yes.
Oh, comfortably.
Yeah.
Whereas A Good Day to Die Hard just didn't really work on a great number of levels. Perhaps the thing that tipped me off about this being a bit strange and not quite so good was when it starts off with John McClane going out looking for trouble, which he never does in all the rest of it, because it's always trouble
departure
happening
from the rest of the
him.
franchise. Yeah. He's kind of like on Craigslist looking for trouble.
Yeah, but he just doesn't seem, as good a cop as John McClane is. He doesn't seem like the kind of person that would have it in his head to go to Russia and do what he does
pick a fight
in this film,
yes.
because it does seem like it's a script where they wanted to have him as some sort of CIA operative, despite the fact that he's not a CIA operative, and they've just ignored that and went ahead with it anyway.
Yep.
And it's raising the stakes in a way that didn't seem, and I don't like using the word in terms of this, believable. There is at least a patina of believability to the things that happened in the other Die Hard films. You can see roughly how an ordinary cop would get into these situations, but that is certainly not present in A Good Day to Die Hard.
And a lot of the blame as well, to be honest with you, I think, shoehorning Jai Courtney in there. Will people stop giving Jai Courtney work, please?
Yes, please, let's stop that now.
The charismatic monolith from the start of 2001 without the importance of the monolith from 2001.
He's up there with Sam Worthington and Dennis Quaid, as far as I'm concerned.
Yes.
the unholy trinity there. I know who's at the top of that pyramid, obviously Drew, but
no, obviously. Well, actually, I don't know. You could have Sam Worthington and Dennis Quaid fight it out for top dog, actually.
That would be an interesting fight.
I think interesting would be the very last thing that fight would be, or anything to do with them in any way.
Yeah, no, really disappointing, and the only action film in history that my wife fell asleep during. There you go. During the big car chase scene at the start, which I think at the time I described as the loudest 12 minutes of cinema in history. And my wife, who was admittedly pregnant at the time, fell asleep in the middle of it.
It's certainly a film that doesn't want for chaos. there's an awful lot of action happening here. It's just very difficult to actually care about
the kicker of it is, I remember when the trailer came out, watching the trailer and thinking, this actually looks like it'll be a good deal of fun in the way that 4 was as well. There's a good deal of sort of Bruce Willis sort of wisecracking and just smirking and looking like he might actually have been enjoying himself. And then you realise actually after you've seen the film that those are the precious few seconds in which he smiled and looked like he was enjoying himself, and the rest of it is just utterly serviceable tosh, which largely lands on the shoulders of, as we say, the charismatic black hole that is Jai Courtney.
And I do wonder exactly how this wound up in director John Moore's lap. It's he's had a strange career path. If you go from Behind Enemy Lines, Flight of the Phoenix, the remake of The Omen, Max Payne, and then a 5-year gap to A Good Day to Die Hard, and that's a strange arc as well.
Yeah, really weird actually. And Behind Enemy Lines, for all its flaws, was actually at the time, I thought, a fairly enjoyable film. Yeah. And I think I want to say I saw that remake of Flight of the Phoenix as well, and which was I know it starred your best friend Drew.
Yes, I was just remembering that. Yes, I remember who was in that.
Quaid is pie, really, isn't he? He's everything. He's everything. I'm suddenly beginning to realise. But yeah, I mean, as it stands now, I think Die Hard, A Good Day to Die Hard, is notable only in my mind for being, I think, the last film ever to be shot on Fuji film stock.
That does not make it a better film.
No. It's a desperate attempt for me to make my boy Bruce have at least some sort of footnote in there.
Although it might just have made it the nail in the coffin.
Yeah.
Which is not to say that Willis is irredeemable. He still shows up in a number of quite interesting films.
Yeah, and he's still got the physicality, and when he wants to, he can still have that charisma. I maintain that under the right circumstances, there is still a good Die Hard film to be made. I would argue that it should probably be the last one, and if only to bring the franchise to a more satisfying conclusion than this entry has. But it really increasingly would rely on some sort of spectacular planetary alignment at this point, which I it's not that I don't have the faith in him, I just don't have the faith in the studio system to deliver that to us at this point. So unless you want to make it as some sort of small independent film, then I fear that I'm not going to get my wish. But it will be interesting to see what he decides to do next, assuming it's not all direct-to-video, because he certainly seems to have made a lot of DTV films, particularly with 50 Cent.
Yes, a puzzling choice.
Yeah,
but between that, there's always the interesting things, like, for want of its execution at points, the Sin City film is still one of the more interesting films you can watch. It's certainly unique in terms of what's out there. The only thing like it is, of course, the first film. So
yes,
he's still attracted to the occasional interesting proposition, things like this, things like Looper, and you just need to, things like Red, of course, Red 1, Red 2, both very enjoyable films. You just need to keep your eyes peeled and avoid the things like G.I. Joe Retaliation. And
don't you worry, I shall.
And your Willis experience shall be unblemished.
Yay! I think that just about wraps it up then, right? All we've got to do now is, have you listened through that commentary yet, Scott, that we recorded?
Yes, I think we'll...
I haven't listened back to it yet, but all that remains is for us to make the decision on whether we pull the trigger on posting that or not.
Yes, whether we decide to inflict a Steven Seagal film on you. We've recorded a commentary already for his excellent vehicle Mercenaries Absolution, featuring your man Vinnie Jones, everyone's man Vinnie Jones, and a true hallmark of quality that is.
Yeah. Here's the thing, I'm pretty sure I've never ever seen a Steven Seagal film, and
shut up, you've never seen Under Siege?
No, told you before. I think I've seen bits and pieces here and there. I'm pretty sure I've never seen Under Siege. But I think it's maybe Vinnie Jones being in it that may tip me over. I may finally have to watch a Steven Seagal film. It's got Vinnie Jones in it too.
Drew, don't make that mistake. If you're telling me you've never seen Under Siege, I could make massive hints as to which the only Seagal film you should watch is.
And it's the one with Vinnie Jones in it, right?
It's Under Siege. If I told you Vinnie Jones was in it at the very end, so you had to watch the whole damn thing before you were brutally crushed by disappointment, would that help?
I don't know.
Vinnie Jones is in it as an angry torpedo. There you go. See if you can spot him, Drew. It's a cameo role.
Penny Jones.
I suppose in keeping with our theme of having these themed podcasts and then choosing an outlier to the topic and recording a commentary on it, we have recorded a commentary for that particular Steven Seagal film. It just remains to be decided whether or not it's suitable for public consumption. And I fear that if we decide it is, and you decide counter to that it's not really our fault so much as the film's. I certainly can't recommend that you take part in it.
So, yes, that's your lot. We'll be back with that commentary on the 10th of this month, and we'll have the intermission up on the 20th. So, until that time, I have been Scott Morris. Thank you very much for listening. If you want to hit us up sometime, you can get us on Twitter. That's at FudsOnFilm. You can get us on Facebook, which is facebook.com/FudsOnFilm, or send us an email, podcast@fudsonfilm.com. We'd love to hear what you think about anything. Doesn't even need to be film related.
Do leave us an iTunes review.
No, if you could.
I don't even care how many stars.
Till next time, I've been Scott, fairly well, and Craig Eastman says goodbye.
Stoke that.
And Drew Tavendale also says goodbye.
Adios.
Your Spanish is coming on.